Welcome to another edition of Whatcha Readin, where I, a professional writer, uh, tell you what I've been reading. Because people ask me all the time, "What are you reading? What current comics?" Like I read current comics. Um, what are you reading? What are you enjoying? What are you reading when you're not writing? And that's the name of that tune. So I've been trying to catch up with Hermes Press's reprints of Johnny Hazard dailies. They do these really nice little hardcovers in which they present the dailies, obviously in black and white. And they got a few volumes ahead of me, and now I'm catching up and I'm enjoying every minute of it. Johnny Hazard was a comic strip that ran from World War II into the 1970s, written and drawn by Frank Robbins, a real double threat. The guy was talented, mega talented at both. As a comic book guy or gal, you may know Frank Robbins better for his work on The Invaders and Batman and Man from Atlantis and things like that. And justifiably so. As the comic strips began to wind down, there was less money to be made in the strips, and eventually Johnny Hazard would be canceled. Robbins went looking for work at the big two. And he began work at Batman. He began work at Batman at a time before Denny O'Neil showed up. And of course, Denny O'Neil brought with him the return to Batman's roots, the moving Batman away from the campy elements that the comic had been played with for years. And Robbins went right along with it. Robbins, prior to Denny's arrival, was writing the typical puzzle, riddle kind of stories that Batman was famous for in Detective and Batman. But when Denny shows up, Robbins obviously digs what he's doing. And, if anything, leans darker and more noirish and begins to draw more stories. Robbins would create Man-Bat. He would create Shotgun Smith and a bunch of other characters for the strip or for the series, and really seemed to dig what Denny was doing. And but it would eventually move over to Marvel and do The Invaders and The Human Fly and Man from Atlantis and a bunch of other strips. He worked on Captain America for a while. But I should also mention he worked on The Shadow at DC as well, and he brought his his heavy chiaroscuro, slightly cartoonish, well, very cartoonish style to the work. A lot of fans didn't like Robbins, but a lot of readers did. His stuff sold well on the stand, so there was no reason for either Marvel or DC to get rid of him. But he wasn't what comic fans thought of as a great comic book artist. Although he is. Robbins was a genius, obviously, of the Noel Sickles school, like Milton Caniff and other artists in that period. Lee Elias, guys like that, very much influenced with the heavy chiaroscuro artwork. And Robbins was a master at drawing for reduction. You take a Robbins panel and blow it up, after a while, you can't even tell what the hell's there, because he really was thinking about the strip being printed smaller and on the crappiest paper imaginable, and drew for that. This volume has some terrific stories. Johnny gets involved. Johnny Hazard is an aviator, much like Steve Canyon or other characters like that. And following World War II, he becomes like an adventurer, going around the world selling his piloting skills to the highest bidder. And in this story, he ends up in a lot of different stories. Some of them funny, some of them more adventure oriented or crime oriented, always suspenseful. He has some run-ins with Chinese communists in a couple of stories. Seems to be a favorite of Robbins to use them as foils. He becomes a pilot for a baseball team, running errands to help out an eccentric baseball player who's having problems with his love life. And that involves a bunch of bookies trying to fix the games. That's a really fun story. Johnny then helps a scientist escape from mainland Red China, and then becomes embroiled with a meeting of criminal masterminds in Hawaii. And all of this involves lots of action, fistfights, chases, plane crashes, and all the rest of it. Robbins was a terrific plotter, always kept the story moving, always kept lots of action going on, always had a subplot hanging in the background, and wrote some fun dialogue and just snappy stuff. And Johnny's just a terrific character. Not terribly nuanced. He's the typical, you know, stern-jawed pilot character, but he's got a terrific sense of humor and an even better sense of justice. And the stories are fun. I'm looking forward to reading the future volumes I got stacked up on my desk. Okay, years ago, my Uncle Bob, he was our favorite uncle. My sisters and I, we just thought he was my mother's little brother. And he was closer in age to us than our other uncles, which I guess was part of it. And he was a cool guy. He was a swinging bachelor in the 60s. And whenever he went on call to the Army Reserve, my grandmother would say, why don't you come over and stay at the apartment for the weekend or the week or whatever? And I would go over and I would have, my Uncle Bobby's room, which I thought was so cool as a kid. And I was fascinated by his shelf of paperback books. And the one that fascinated me the most was a book called Run for the Trees by James Rand. And it was, I love the cover. And it was way above my reading ability. I would read the back cover and try to figure out what is this about. I would try to read it, but it was just beyond my capabilities as a kid to understand. And I thought about the book for years, and then I went and I wanted to buy a copy, and of course the paperback was crazy expensive. So I ended up buying a hardcover, which is better anyway. And I read the book. It's a big, doorstop of a book. One of those 1960s beach read kind of things. And it falls into the category of an adventure story. And I love safari adventure stories, anything about explorers, big game hunters, guys risking their life to hunt animals bigger and more dangerous than them. But more accurately, it falls within a category I call the white man's wet dream. It's not a phrase I coined. It's the title of this Frank Frazetta painting for the National Lampoon back in the day. White Man's Wet Dream story, pretty self-explanatory. Tarzan falls into that category. The Phantom, any safari movie you've ever seen. This male wish fulfillment fantasy of a guy running around shooting big animals at will. He's a tough guy, respected by all. Ava Gardner and Grace Kelly vie for his attention. Just that kind of thing. And this story, Run for the Trees, is very much like that. It's about two guys who meet and they're just so full of testosterone. It's a real bromance. I mean, these guys are just so manly that they're drawn to each other because they're like the most manly guy each other have ever met. And, and even though they bond through death, through killing people and things, they have their falling out because they're both so freaking manly that they're in a constant pissing contest with each other. And they get in a number of fist fights. They get into business together and then have a falling out and blah, blah, blah. And of course, their business is death. They're just killing animals left and right, abusing the natives in the most shocking way. And these are the heroes of the story. And I mean, they begin by hunting crocodiles. They're shooting Cape buffalo. They hunt silverback gorillas, which seems utterly pointless and mean, but this is a mindset of these guys. They're constantly testing their own virility, and not in an apologetic way from the author's point of view. The author is a big game hunter himself, and so he writes with a lot of authority here. So the book is fascinating for its terminology, phrasing. It's written in the 60s, but set between the two world wars in a period where apparently, well, even today, there were large areas of Africa where there was no law except whatever law a powerful man could make. And that's basically what the story is about. It's about two powerful guys entering a culture where they dominate. That's what makes it a white man's wet dream story. The racism is not casual in this book, and the cruelty to both the locals and the animals. I mean, there's scenes where they slaughter a pride of lions with a machine gun because one of them can't stand big cats. He doesn't like big cats. He views them the way we would view cockroaches, basically. And it's in the end of it all, it's a pretty ugly book. And now you're saying to yourself, well, Chuck, why would you read a book like that? And it's like, well, it's kind of fascinating. This view into this mind of this author. Where was he coming from? What's he trying to say? It's as if Heart of Darkness had been rewritten with Kurtz as the hero. So it was interesting in that way. And all too often we see books being banned by people who say, I read banned books, but they love banning books that they don't like, that they think are inappropriate, politically incorrect, racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever. These are the same people who like to tear down statues and rewrite history. But it's important that books like this exist so we can look back at a mindset from a time period not our own. It's like I always say when writing historical fiction, you can't write people from historical periods in the past using our modern day mores, because our mores are always shifting. As we see in the past couple of years, they're trying to shift them to a level of insanity we've never seen before. It's almost as if the media and our leadership are promoting mass hysteria, mass delusion. So it's important almost as almost to look back and see where we've been, to read a book like Run for the Trees and be shocked by it. I kind of have to imagine readers even in the 60s were shocked, because this is it was difficult to read this thinking these guys were the heroes in the book, because they are they're a nasty pair of individuals. They are real brutes who fancy themselves as intellectuals and world beaters. But maybe that was the author's point. Maybe the author's point was to shock me. But I didn't, if he did, he didn't wink. He didn't wink at the reader and say, this is where I was all going. And maybe that's the best thing I can say about a book like this is it didn't tell me what to think. It had me draw my own conclusions. Speaking of White Man's Wet Dream, I have a new Conan book out called Caravan of the Damned. You can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you order it directly from Arkhaven, you get a free PDF of it, which you can read on your phone or read on your whatever your handheld device is. So that's it for me this week. I'll hopefully be back next week and tell you more about stuff I've been reading. And I'll see you all down the road.